So today's guest is my dear, dear sister, Ruth Schwartz with Conscious Girlfriend Academy. Ruth, would you just share a tiny bit about you and your work?
Sure. Yeah. I've worn many hats in my life, including this one.
Hmm.
And right now, I am the director of Conscious Girlfriend Academy, which is a worldwide organization for lesbians and queer women dedicated to preventing heartbreak, dating wisely, and loving well. And for a long time, I was a professor of creative writing. For a long time before that, I was an AIDS educator. Have always been a poet, a mystic, a writer, somebody trying to engage with the big forces and the big mysteries of our existence. And so, right this minute, that has all come together in this particular form where I'm getting to think and teach and read and write a lot about dating and relationships
Mm.
through the lens of being conscious and being a woman or adjacent non binary person who loves women.
We've been talking about doing this for how long? Like a couple of years, probably, since I don't even know. Thousands of topics that I would love to talk to you about. But the one that's coming up today, it feels like we have bared witness to one another, falling in love, having our hearts broken, finding ourselves seeking love again, and then also finding ourselves in this place of deepening into our own solitude and finding the most rich nourishment there. And you and I have had a friendship. It seems like we have these parallel paths where we come in and then we're always in friendship, but like we're overlapping almost at the same time. You just have been such an ally. And here we are again with this deep journey around how to heal and what does healing look like. And I think that's what I want to seed. So the topic that we've been riffing on individually, you with your Conscious Girlfriend Academy, my last podcast, I wove some of this in, which is these two paradigms, and there might be more, but
Right.
this one paradigm where, and then I want you to just kind of riff on this with me, but the one being a, our relational trauma needs to be healed in relationship. And there's a lot of truth and beauty and a long lineage behind that paradigm. And then there's this other paradigm that I think is getting a little bit more articulation. Joe Dispenza feels like he's kind of leveling this up a lot lately, which is there's very deep healing relationally that can happen in solitude as well.
Mhm.
And so I thought we could just start with those two pieces and see where it takes us. So I'll just turn it over to you because I know we've been riffing. Where would you like to go next with this?
Well, I mean, I'm so glad we're having this conversation. And, I think we can look at what do we mean by solitude? What do we
Hmm.
mean by relational wounds? What do we mean by healing? Like just
Hmm.
kind of unpacking each of those terms, because as I was thinking today, getting ready to do this, I was thinking about what intimate romantic relationships have primarily served in my life. And I don't think that they have primarily healed my relational wounds.
Uh-huh.
I think that they have often reinflicted some of the same
Hmm.
relational wounds. Sometimes they've healed other kinds of wounds. Certainly, sometimes they've healed the wound of having a deep sense of aloneness in the world, in my
Hmm.
particular being, my particular consciousness. And so there's been a healing that has come in just from whatever kinds of deep engagement have been possible between me and whoever I was with. And then absolutely, they've been tremendously expansive. Like, I feel like part of my project on Earth has been to understand the human experience, which of course is not understandable, but still I engage. And so I feel like with my lovers and partners, I've learned so much about different aspects of the human experience, both my own and theirs. So it's been tremendously rich and satisfying to my soul in that way. But I don't know that that's the same as healing. And
Hmm.
when we talk about specifically like, okay, I came out of childhood with these particular relational wounds. The concept that a lover or partnership is going to re-inflict, but then for the purpose of helping me heal some of those same relational wounds, I'm not sure that I've actually experienced that.
Hmm.
I don't know. I'm curious to know what you think for yourself.
Yeah, I think the same is true for me. I would say well, what I want to tag here is repetition compulsion, and that oftentimes we're going to attract what has been familiar from the past. Potentially, I don't know if this is how the universe works, but with the potential for healing. But oftentimes, I think it becomes a recapitulation. And I think in my last partnership, there was there was a certain kind of healing at an attachment system level that happened for me that had never happened prior. The irony is the way that we split up re-inflicted that same attachment wound, but at a deeper level. So then I spent the next 2.5 years working that inside of myself. But the relationship itself was the arrow. I feel like it had like hot burning arrow that just cut to the core of a wound that I distantly was aware of.
Uh-huh. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I guess, part of me went to, well, would you say that from that relationship there was a net gain in healing or a net loss? But then another part of me thought, wow, these terms are way too binary. I
Uh-huh.
mean, there was obviously a deep engagement for you, both in those wounds
Yeah.
and in receiving some deep, deep medicine for them, and
Hmm.
then also having to really re-encounter them in such an excruciating way.
Hmm.
So maybe it's kind of ridiculous to say, was there a net gain, net loss? I mean, it's just, you know, some other shape like spiral labyrinth.
Yeah, I think I like what you're doing with your hands there. It does feel like a circuitry of some kind.
Yeah.
But I would say if this had happened to me maybe 10 years ago, I don't know if there would have been any gain because I don't know if I would have had the years of cultivating being with such intense emotional states
Mhm.
to have the breakthroughs that I had this time around, to see things more clearly, to really ultimately to have a level of self acceptance and compassion for parts of myself that I don't know if I could have gotten there
Mhm.
without the lance of this boil, like this being cut so deep.
Right.
So there was a big gain ultimately. But let's come back to what you were saying, because I feel like you were kind of seeding that maybe there is, maybe there isn't gain.
Well, and maybe it's just so much more mysterious than that,
Mm-hmm.
just in terms of what our souls are doing. Like,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm thinking about two relationships that I had that were roughly 20 years apart. And the first of these two was so shattering when it ended and the way that it ended. And at that point in my life, I was not familiar with much inside me.
Mm-hmm.
And so I really did not know how to work with it in a
Yeah.
healing way at all. And then the second relationship, a little bit more than 20 years later, was with a woman who at times there were these moments where uncannily she even looked to me like the former partner. And it wasn't
Mhm.
something that I had seen right away, but I
Yeah.
remember, I don't know, maybe a month in, it was like I was doing a double take. And the former partner at that point was dead.
Mhm.
And so I was, what? I mean, it's giving me chills to talk about it right now because I couldn't believe how much in that light, in that moment, her face looked like the other woman's face.
Wow.
So there was some kind of deep retracing,
Mm-hmm.
clearly, that, in some way I have to honor the mystery of. And early on in this second relationship, I kept having this gut sense that she was going to break up with me out of the blue with no explanation. And a part of me was sort of bracing for that. And
Mm-hmm.
then I was like, well, why do I think this? Why do I feel this? Where's this coming from? Is this just my stuff? And she and I actually talked about it. I keep having this fear. Do you think there's any chance you would do that? And she said, well, it wouldn't be my pattern. And then I thought, well, that is what the other person had done. So I must just be holding this from that other relationship. But in fact, it is what the second woman also ended up doing. It is certainly true. I mean, the level, I think 20 plus years later, the level of depth to which this relationship went was exponentially greater than the first relationship. The level of depth that the second woman was playing at was much deeper.
Mm-hmm.
What happened between us was much deeper. And the level of my pain also felt concurrently, concomitantly deeper.
Mm-hmm.
And like, so what had 20 plus years before felt like, oh my God, I don't know how I'm going to want to go on with my life. Then to have gotten to a point so much more, I think, further, even these terms are binary, but I felt like, okay, I know myself so much better. I have so many more healing tools. And once again, I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to want to go on with my life.
Yeah.
And so the level of shattering was
Mm-hmm.
intense. And yet, out of that, which speaks to what you were saying, the level of transformation that I ultimately have harvested from that
Mm-hmm.
has been very intense. But I don't think that that's what the relational therapists mean when they talk about, relationships are the only way to heal our attachment wounds. I don't think it happened that way for me. I think it happened in much more of a extremely dark night of the soul,
Yeah.
sobbing on my hands and knees, talking to my guides, traveling to the other side of the world because I was in search of a place large enough to hold my grief. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, so it made me embark on a very deep and ultimately transformational journey. But it
Yeah.
wasn't that I got that healing with that partner.
Yeah. Maybe that's the distinction because some people are destined to do it inside of the relationship
Mm.
where they stay. I mean, attachment injury and repairing those together and building the trust with rupture and repair and rupture and repair. When there's a
Yeah.
level of rebuilding, or not even rebuilding, but building trust and capacity over time, there's probably a lot of healing. I mean, there is a lot of healing because I think we've both had moments of that with the people we've dated. But then there's this other piece you're talking about, which is, and this was my recent journey of just being splayed out on my knees, dark night of the soul. And so that became healing relationship with myself and me reconnecting with something larger than myself to hold me.
Right. Right.
And then there's this thing that Joe Dispenza's talking about and where that fits in, which is this conscious solitude is a way of healing attachment or relationship wounds as well. So I wonder if that's where we should go because I know in CGA you talk a lot about the relational piece, but let me ask you, is there more that you'd like to explore on healing through relationship that could be helpful in this moment, or would it make more sense to shift over to this other paradigm?
Well, I guess I just want to say, we are each such different beings.
Mm-hmm.
And you and I, Anne Marie, part of why we're friends is because we both often feel like a different sort of being than many of the beings around us, at least the human ones. So I just want to be careful not to generalize much from my own experience because when
Uh-huh.
I look at the particular human wounding that I have from my childhood, how I would characterize my relational wounding, I see a lot of people, I work with a lot of people who have very specific pieces of relational wounding that I don't have.
Mm-hmm.
I certainly have plenty of relational wounding, but it's just sort of like a different cell structure. And, like I was, as you know, as a kid, I was praised, I was adored, I was celebrated, I received a lot of a certain kind of love and affirmation and essentially zero criticism. And I know now that that is rare.
Mm-hmm.
It is super rare for me to talk to people that have had that experience.
Yeah.
Now, I mean, some of the wounding was my parents were very young. They had no idea how to raise a baby. They both wanted me to be their therapist starting about age 3.
Mm.
It wasn't like I was held. It wasn't like I was attuned to. It
Mm-hmm.
wasn't like I had, parents that were bigger than me that knew how to take care of me spiritually, emotionally, or even physically. So that's my wounding.
Mm-hmm.
But I think in certain ways with that wounding, maybe it makes sense that there is healing that comes from being with forces that are much bigger than me, which
Mm-hmm.
means, the larger world, the spirit realm, whereas with another human being, it's not really their job to be bigger than me now.
Yeah.
Yeah, at least as I'm an adult. I mean, as when I was an infant, it was, I guess, from a human psychology standpoint, somebody's job. But I don't know. It's just, so I just wanted, I want to really explicitly name, I guess, for Conscious Girlfriend Academy people that might be listening to this,
Yeah.
that the medicine is different depending on the wound. Like I
Uh-huh.
know so many people that were intensely criticized, not praised, not celebrated, not affirmed or adored or supported in the ways
Mm-hmm.
that I was as a kid. And so it makes complete sense to me that for people that have had that experience, there are very specific human pieces of healing that need to come in.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm glad you're naming that. I think it brings it to the larger point, which is everything is relationship ultimately,
Mhm.
whether it's relationship with a therapist or a partner or a friend. And the question is, how do we find our way to healing these fractures or these wounds that have happened in relationship with other?
Mhm.
And I really appreciate you naming, like, it's almost like it depends. The entry point is the kind of wound we've had, like what kind of healing, or in Hakomi, they would call it, what's the missing experience that needs to be
Right,
healed from that time? And then
right.
it's a mystery as to how that happens over a lifetime, or if it happens, or if it's about something different.
Right, right. I love that you said that because it's like, if it's even supposed to happen,
Hmm.
like I've done journeys where I've looked at the experience of my sister, who on
Hmm.
the human plane is a very, very, very hurt and damaged person, tragically and intensely so.
Yeah.
And when I talked, when I had the experience of being in contact with her spirit was just like lithe and fun and powerful and excited to dive into this human life where she would get to experience degradation and debasement and feeling powerless because she was so curious about what that would be like.
Wow. Yeah.
And so, well, that confounds our notion about the purpose of a human life is for healing.
Exactly. I know, because I think there can often be this sense that we're here to heal all these wounds when maybe we're here to just have a big life experience. And some of us heal certain things, quote, heal, or have it be more integrated. And some of us from the outside, it might look like we're causing a lot of damage to ourselves, but we might be right on purpose to whatever it is. Where, like your sister, she's trying to have a certain kind of experience.
Right. I mean, if we can trust those perceptions that come through from those larger places. But
Hmm.
times when I've had these conversations, which have often been struggles and arguments with my guides or with these larger beings that I sometimes dialogue with,
Hmm.
even though what they say is very challenging and confounding to my human self, it also at the same time has this feeling of deep brightness, like, oh my God,
Mm.
this finally makes sense. Because if I look at my sister's life through a purely human lens, it is just unmitigated tragedy.
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah.
And it certainly doesn't make sense. And if I look at my family's life in general, like if I think that the purpose of human beings is that we're all kind of, perhaps slowly sometimes, but we're all evolving on this arc of consciousness, and each generation is able to do things the previous generation was not, that's not necessarily the case.
Yeah. What do you think the case is?
Well, my guides have said I am not going to be ever large enough to grasp it. I can just
Hmm.
have these moments of glimpses. It's like that parable about the blind man and the elephant,
Oh,
and they're
yeah.
each just describing one part of the elephant. They can't conceive of the whole thing.
Hmm.
So sometimes I've had the image of like in moments, I have one finger on one hair in the elephant's tail.
Hmm.
I can't say what the elephant is.
Right.
But it makes sense to me that we're not all here for the same reasons. Our
Hmm.
souls really charted different courses for us. We might not even all be here from the same planet. Like there's a whole lot going on here.
What is the deeper, what is the notion of being in relationship? Maybe we go back to what you said, because I think it's like, what does it mean to be in relationship with life? And what does it mean? What is this whole conscious solitude? What does it mean to be in relationship with ourselves,
Yeah.
which is not in exclusion with relationship with other? So
Right.
maybe we start there. You look
Mhm.
like you've maybe got something you want to share about that.
Yeah. I mean, I think at this moment in my life, after many decades, some of which you witnessed me through, of, just kind of intense relationship after intense
Mm.
relationship after intense relationship, all of which I would say, if they weren't healing, they were incredible crucibles for learning. They were
Hmm.
absolutely transformational.
Yeah.
But now I feel myself to be in a period of time where I am loving not being in an intimate relationship. I
Mm.
am loving it so much. And what I feel like I'm doing is just deepening and deepening and deepening the intimacy with this person,
Hmm.
if we can even call this one person, because there's so many aspects of me and parts of me. And I'm sure that this compendium is not the same as it was 5 years ago, 10, 15, 20. So it's
Hmm.
like, who is this person? And who is this person now? And what feeds this person now? What trains this person now? What lights this person up now? And so I feel like by not being in unsteady, intimate relationship where I'm continuously interfacing with another being, I have all of my energy, or so much more of my energy gets to just be with all of these inner relationships.
Hmm.
And that it feels really good.
Say more about that, the inner relationships. What are you getting? What are you discovering? And what are these inner relationships? Different parts of self or?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think, there's so many different ways that we could talk about this. And as you know, one system of thought I've been really influenced by is internal family systems, FES. And recently I saw a talk by Robert Falconer, who's this amazing IFS person who's
Hmm.
also, I would call him very shamanic. I don't know if
I had a
he's,
session with him. He's quite shamanic. Hmm.
yeah, yeah. So he was saying just, we're walking around with this illusion that we each are one person.
Hmm.
None of us is one person. We are a multi-part mind. We
Yeah.
really are. Each of us is a whole bunch of beings crammed into one body, trying to make choices as oneself. And no wonder we have so much trouble doing that. And so I find that really provocative and fascinating. And again, I don't know if it's as true for everyone.
Hmm.
I certainly know many people for whom I think that is very true. And maybe some of it is just the quality of our soul or the nature of the complexity of our human experience, the degree of trauma, whatever it is. But it certainly is true for me. Like there are a whole bunch of beings in here that push and pull in different directions. And so the work of trying to understand, like I use this metaphor a lot in the academy, how can we become more congruent with ourselves, more compatible with ourselves before we think about who on the outside are we compatible with? How can we develop more
Hmm. Hmm.
compatibility with ourselves? How can we get the different parts of ourselves rowing or paddling in the same direction, whatever kind of boat we're in? So that's what I feel like I'm doing right now in a fuller way than I've ever done before.
Hmm. Yeah, I see that in you. I've been witnessing that. And it could sound really esoteric for some listeners to say we have all these beings in us. So I want to just break that down. You're talking about parts, like we have protectors, we have different parts that have different needs, or can you say more about what you mean by all these beings?
Yeah, I mean, in IFS, they talk about it on the one hand as exiles, which are usually
Hmm.
young hurt parts of ourselves, and then different kinds of protectors that have emerged kind of in layers on top of those exiles. And
Hmm.
some of the protectors are managers trying to make sure that we, live reasonably functional lives. Some of them are firefighters trying to extinguish the pain of the fire of the pain through any means necessary. So they cause
Mm-hmm.
addictions and compulsions and all kinds of stuff. And that's kind of the basic IFS model. But I think people like Bob Falconer are taking it much further and saying, okay, we have parts of ourselves that are deeply connected to spirit. We also have parts of ourselves or places where we've gotten infiltrated by energies or beings that are not even us
Mm-hmm.
that, need to be released. And so I guess I can ground the conversation by talking about some of the parts I experience inside myself, and maybe you can as
Sure.
well.
Yeah.
I have a part of myself that does not like to feel too isolated.
Mm-hmm.
And that may be a young part, an exile. And I have another part that just absolutely thrives on solitude and feels the deepest sense of connection in nature. And not just any nature, but as we were
Mm-hmm.
talking about earlier, I have very specific relationships with a few places on this earth.
Yeah.
And you were saying the same. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
not just any river, it's not just any creek, it's not just any open landscape. I mean, I can enjoy visually any view or river or creek or getting in one on a hot day, but there are some places where when I'm there, I just feel like, oh my God, I'm knowing and being known.
Mm-hmm.
And,
Deep relationship.
yeah. And then I have another part of me that sometimes just wants to be surrounded by people in a city, being anonymous, just people watching,
Mm-hmm.
and likes to be tasting a lot of different flavors and energies of humanity around me. And I think
Yeah.
that's one of the parts that has propelled me to travel a lot.
Mm-hmm.
Although by traveling, I'm also making contact with different, earthly or spirit places.
Yeah.
So, but it's like just naming all of those things. It's like, well, where am I going to live? I don't want to be too isolated. I don't want to be around too many people. But then another part of me does want to be around a lot of people, but certain
Mm-hmm.
kinds of people with certain, like,
It
how am
can
I
get
going to work
very
those?
noisy. Traffic jams in there.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And so these are examples of being in relationship to oneself. And this is what you're saying that you teach in the academy is in order to be in relationship with other, it's really helpful to be in relationship with these parts. Because what happens if you're not in relationship with these parts in relationship with another?
Well, one thing that I've done in the past and that I see many other people doing is identifying with one part. Let's
Mm-hmm.
say identifying with the part that says, I want to be in a partnership. I want to find a committed partnership. I want human intimacy. I want to be with somebody who's ready for that, who's going to show up for that. And, they look for that. In some cases, maybe they even find that. And then if they haven't been listening to other parts of themselves underneath, you know, sometimes the minute they find that, it's like another part starts emerging, which is like, wait a minute, I don't want that at all. I want complete solitude. I want complete freedom. I don't want to have to talk to somebody else every day.
Right.
And so I want to normalize that. I mean, I think it's possible that not everybody is as complex and as internally contradictory. And I think those of us with more attachment wounds
Mm-hmm.
often are more internally contradictory because we really had to develop these different parts in order to survive.
Yeah.
Um, but I do see many people walking around either identifying with wanting a relationship with someone else and disowning all the other parts of them that either don't want that or are terrified of it. And then, so if they either that keeps them from finding somebody, or if they do find somebody, it's going to get really messy. And chances
Mm-hmm.
are they may find somebody who's got their own version of something similar going on. And then it gets exponentially more tangled with all of these pushes and pulls coming from both people and, collisions.
Mm.
And I also see the opposite, people that are walking around saying, I don't want a relationship. I don't want a relationship. And then they meet somebody, they get lit up. There's so much chemistry, connection, attraction. Oh my God, I really want a relationship.
Mm.
But of course, the part of themselves that they were first speaking from has not gone away.
Yeah.
And so that part is still there somehow. And depending if they find somebody else who's really all in then that part of themselves is going to have to get stronger. Or maybe they're going to find somebody else who's going to be more identified with the unsure about relationship thing. And that, like all of
Mm-hmm.
these very intense push pulls that we end up playing out, as you know, in
Yeah.
such excruciating ways with
Mm-hmm.
other human beings and causing so much hurt and
Yeah.
experiencing so much hurt.
Mm-hmm.
Um, it is my belief that the more congruence we have internally, the more we can make external choices that are not disowning any of the different parts inside. And then we're
Mm-hmm.
also a lot more likely to find somebody else who's more congruent. And whatever it is that we create, it's not necessarily so easy to arrive at consensus with the parts of inside of me,
Mm-hmm.
for the listeners who remember the lesbian feminist days of the 90s where we had to have these endless meetings about, like, can we achieve consensus about, do we hang the toilet paper roll this way or that?
Really important things.
It gets really exhausting to try to achieve consensus.
Oh my God.
And I am speaking tongue in cheek, but
Yeah,
it
I know.
was, it was things like, are we going to, as a household, pay for peanut butter, or do we object to peanut? It was, I mean, it was very earnest and beautiful, but it was also very exhausting. Um,
Yeah.
so consensus is hard
Mm-hmm.
often between
Consensus
people
of
or
these
within
parts.
people. Well,
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
yeah, I mean,
both.
that was an example of trying to get to consensus between different people. But I
Mm-hmm.
find that even for me, like, that's why I'm loving not being in an intimate relationship with someone else right now. So I can just have these inner meetings, dialogues between the different parts of me that want different things. Because
Yeah.
as I say in the academy, this is our 24/7, 365 relationship. Like,
Mm-hmm.
this is the person that is never going to be able to break up with us, or
Yeah.
that we'll never be able to break up with.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, it feels deeply meaningful and worthwhile to me to be really engaging relationally in this interior way.
Yeah.
But I feel like I'm talking a
Mm.
lot, so I really want to hear.
I want you to talk a lot. This is great. And you're just lighting me up because I feel there's so much we could talk about around relationship. And I know you do quite a bit in Conscious Girlfriend and I in my work. But I'd like to really focus our time now on what it means to build this kind of relationship with self,
Mhm.
all the parts with ourselves. I think it's kind of like, let's explore this other paradigm that there is deep healing in conscious solitude. And that's conscious solitude is a term that Joe Dispenza uses as
Mhm.
he's delivering this
Mhm.
paradigm. Because as you know, for many months now, well, many months now, gosh, like a year, I have really been turning inward. And it was as a result of this breakup where I was working such deep, heartbreaking material that it had to do with the ex partner, but the ex partner's choices and attachment style really just opened this deep wound in me. And when I finally got through what felt like a year and a half of just emotional angst, and I'm sure most people listening know what a dark night of the soul is, and just this feeling where you cannot see your way through. You feel like everything is dissolved in how you've been able to orient. And to your point earlier, it's kind of like, how do I go on? Like, who am I? What is life? And what's love? When there's so much pain. And once I got through a lot of that intensity, I landed really deeply in this home. I've been here almost 2 years, but it was probably 6 months in, and all of a sudden, because I live far enough from town, I was unable to go and just grab a coffee or go meet a friend for this because it's a mountain drive and it's kind of it's a journey. It's not a zip down and zip back up between client calls. That I started spending a lot more time by myself, which has been a part of my whole life. I'm an introvert. I love connection, but I love quiet time in nature. But what I'm really have been noticing, and I know we've talked about this, the appeal of this paradigm where we are being, not everyone, it's like when we're called, just like anything else. There is another path that
Mhm.
has deep, to your point, a deep journey around no longer seeking external support and validation for a lot of these parts. I mean, of course, the external support can happen, but there's something ruthless about this journey of getting acquainted with the for me, it's been a lot of the verbal dialogue about myself and life and seeing the ways that because unlike you, I grew up in an environment where I felt constantly criticized. I was never doing anything right. And so I have that internal voice in me. I mean, you know that so well about me. But my point is, I'm kind of rambling on here, is that something is fundamentally changing. And I could say in my brain by the amount of time I've spent alone, but not just in my brain, like deep in my heart. And when Joe Dispenza introduced this concept, he was talking about, and we can put some language around this in a moment if it feels helpful, just a framework. But he was talking about, I don't remember the research studies, but they scanned someone's brain and they could see that this woman who had been spending a lot of time in solitude, that her two hemispheres were starting to communicate more together. And he said something that, and I have tracked this in myself because I live in a mountain home. There's a lot to tend to. I have a lot of decisions to make. I'm also building a retreat space on part of my home that I haven't had anyone to turn to. Well, sometimes I'll WhatsApp you and be like, hey, what do you think about? But for the most part, I haven't had time to go outward and ask someone. And so there's been this consistent having to actually start to attune to what am I sensing? What am I feeling? And to do that means I have to get underneath the 6-year-old in me that's panicking because she needs to make her lunch and breakfast and doesn't know how to read the macaroni and cheese box, because that was really my introduction to becoming so self-reliant. And so all of that to say that I do believe that we heal so deeply in relationship, even when there is a lot of challenge and rupture. Sometimes the healing is inside of ourselves. It's not between us and the other person, to our point earlier. But I also feel that there's a lot of merit to the level of self-compassion and exquisite learning and knowing of the parts of us that we most don't want to see. The things we see in other people that we most dislike, what that might be activating in us, and where there's potentially shame around that version of that inside. So I'll pause there. I think maybe my question for you would be, let's talk about solitude. And let's talk about, from your perspective, why it can be a powerful practice for people, especially given that our culture would be more biased to, you're isolating, this is your attachment trauma, there's something wrong with you, which has been my internal voices that I've had to really work with. And I know I said I was going to ask you a question and I'm still riffing, but I have one more thing to say, because I reached out to a mentor some months back and I said, is this okay? Like I am so luxuriating in all this time sitting by the fire and watching the snowfall and doing my own thing at home, creating, but I'm not seeing that many people right now. And she was like, sweetie, yeah, this is because this is how you get to know you in a deeper way, is you're not surfing through someone else's emotional field every single day. You are surfing through your own material. To your point earlier, there's no one else's material that I'm trying to make meaning out of. It's all mine. It's all my inner conflict. It's all my own projections. And that when she said that to me, everything settled, because I kind of felt like, you know, me, I can be so nerdy in certain ways. And it was like, oh, this is such a deep study of what it means to start deconstructing even these cultural beliefs that we are supposed to be with other people and be in community. And I'm not saying we shouldn't be, but I'm saying, who are we in those communities if we haven't done this integrative work of getting to know these parts of ourselves so that we know which one is in the driver's seat in a community or a relationship environment?
Mhm.
So, all right, your turn. What's coming up for you around all of that, or the conscious solitude frameworks, or
Well, just as we could easily agree that to say, there's so many types of relationships. And even if
right?
we talk about romantic and sexual relationships, there are so many types of romantic and sexual relationships, just
Absolutely.
vast numbers of different types. I think there are also vast numbers of different kinds of solitude slash being alone slash isolation. And there have been times in my life, not that long ago, even like when the relationship ended, the second of the two relationships, the
Hmm.
one in which I was so shattered. I remember then being alone in the house that I was living in and feeling like this clawing discomfort and bleakness. And a part of me that felt so desperate from aloneness and
Hmm.
just needed to be around other people. And it was so primal that it was shocking to me because, as I said, at that point in my life, I had a lot of tools, and it just felt like
Hmm.
none of the tools that I had could touch that. It was like, I need to be around others. And now I am at a point where my need to be around others is so different and so much less. So, what was healthy or healing or life giving for me at that point and what is at this point are just so different. So, I think it's
Hmm.
really important not to say to somebody who's anywhere like having that experience that I was having a few years ago, like, you need to do conscious solitude. Like, that would have
Hmm.
just made me climb the walls. That was just
Totally.
medicine for the part of me that was in so much anguish
Yeah.
in that way at that moment. But now I think I have healed. I mean, since that time, my need and desire for intimate relationship really changed. And so, as you know, for several years, I've gone kind of obsessively back and forth around this question of, does this mean I'm healed or does this mean I'm broken? Like, wait a minute, why don't I have that same level of desire for intimate relationship that had fueled me for decades in my life? Is that just because I got so hurt by that person that now I've withdrawn? That would be the
Hmm.
broken explanation. Or is it because I had to do so much deep work in the wake of that shattering that now I've healed something in my attachment system? And I've engaged with it so much, I don't think it's brokenness, but I don't know if it's as binary as it's healedness either. And when I've talked
Yeah.
to my guides about it, they just said it was like one phase of my life ended and another part of me had to come forth. Like there
Hmm.
was a death that happened.
Hmm.
And which makes sense. And that's part of
Yeah.
why for a long time I didn't know, how am I going to be able to live? How am I going to want my life again?
Hmm.
So in the wake of that, I don't know, I'm living a different life.
Hmm. Yeah. I witnessed that. What strikes me right now is that this isn't really about solitude or relationship external. It's really about our connection to it's definitely our connection with other people, but it's our connection to ourselves and what the authentic need is in any given moment. Whether it comes from wound and we're trying to run away from being alone because it scares us, or we're trying to hunker down to be alone because we feel like we should power through. That could be my wound at
Or
times.
because people scare us, and so that
Yeah.
we're running away from people to be alone.
Yeah, exactly. There's all these variations, but I think that you and I often we talk so much actually about energy. We're talking a lot about psychology right now, but I want to shift our conversation towards some energetics for a minute because even if we just, because I agree with you, conscious solitude, well, we haven't even defined what that is yet, but solitude, it's like being with ourselves, whether someone's in the next room or we are living alone and we don't see people for days. I think solitude is an interesting word. It could be framed and defined in so many different ways. But I feel like the essence of what we're talking about, especially when you brought in the parts work, and this is where I feel so much juice these days. And it's happening a lot when I guide ceremony with plant medicine. I'm feeling like I'm witnessing so many people, and I would say I'm included in this, where the heart and the mind are learning to come into connection with each other. And that when I think about the science of, when I think about heart math is an institute in California. It's been around for decades. I was certified probably 10 years ago or more. And the thing that I love about their research is that they have, for a very long time, been trying to help people understand. And they, by the way, they talk about trees too and their resonance, but that while we focus so much on our mind and our thoughts, and of course, our narratives are a huge part of our suffering, my suffering, many people's suffering, that there's an intelligence in the heart. And even the heart releases hormones just as much as the brain. The heart sends more messages to the brain than the brain to the heart. And I think it's an EGG, I can't remember the actual testing equipment, but it is able to measure that the heart, its amplitude is 60 times more than the brain, which means the power that it exerts is 60 times more. And the electromagnetic field, which is like the distance that it expands, is 100 times more.
Wow.
And so there's just this sense that the heart holds it holds energetically so much power. It also drives our emotions and our thoughts. And getting back to energetics, all of this creates the field that we walk around. And you remember Pigpen from Snoopy? Did you ever see Snoopy when you were little? It's kind of like that little dust bowl that lives around us. And those are our emotional states. I often feel that in our culture, with the speed that we're in and with the amount of use on the devices, we don't necessarily pay as much attention to our energetic field. Not only what are we projecting, but what are we picking up, especially sensitive people, or when you're in a relationship and you can feel, I have this attachment with my dog, and when she's sick, my whole system is just fucked. I'm just like, I can feel the activation. I can feel, when she had cancer recently, like a lot of my whole field I lost my coherence. And I think that when I think about everything we're talking about, whether it's in a relationship, whether it's we find it with ourselves, whether we're out by a river or a tree, it seems like what we're all ultimately solving for is connection. And connection at a deeper level of like coherence in our own field, where our heart and our mind are actually supporting each other rather than we get these intuitive instincts and the mind is like, oh, that's crazy, don't do that. You and I both know, because we've shared many messages about moments where our body and our heart are guiding us to do something, but our mind is like, why would you do that? Like, why would you live there? Or why would you? I traveled 17 hours to get to an island that I'd never been to before, Salt Spring, in the fall. And all I wanted to do was abort that plan because it sounded so fucking long and stupid. And I wanted to do something like get on a plane and go to Big Sur. But my heart was like, this is where you're going. And I listened, and it was probably one of the most empowering trips of my life. And so I know I'm saying a lot here, but I think what I want to highlight, and then I want to toss it over to you, is that there's something so beautiful when we can be with our psychology, we can understand our wounds, and we can also understand that we're not broken. And what if there wasn't as much to fix as we think? And what if we slowed down enough to start to feel who we are as an energetic being and what it's like to work on the coherence of these inner dilemmas that you spoke to and what I'm talking about with the heart and mind having different. And what would it be like to spend more time getting to know how to become more coherent in moments when we feel stressed and abandoned or whatever comes up at an attachment level?
Yeah, it's such a beautiful solution to the binary of conscious relationship versus conscious solitude, this or that. Because if what we're seeking is coherence, and if how we access it is connection, it could be through connecting to all the parts of ourselves. It could be connecting to a tree or a river or a mountain. It could be connecting to another human being. Any of those things could potentially help us access greater coherence or not.
True. But then the question is, are we discerning enough if it's not to say no and move away,
Right.
especially if we have any kind of fawning where we want to please or
Right.
appease, or we're
Right.
afraid to set a boundary, or we question our need. That piece feels really significant too, is being able to discern if something isn't creating coherence.
Mhm.
It's okay to say no.
Right.
It's
Right.
okay. I mean, you watched me with a dear, dear friend whom I spent time with. We took a pause, and then we spent time, I don't know, 3 weeks ago or something. And the field felt so incoherent, and
Mm.
this was consistent in our previous times, but I hadn't been able to identify it. So as much as I love this person, I don't like how my nervous system feels.
So,
And there's nothing wrong with her and there's nothing wrong with me, but there's been, in honoring that, I have felt that's how I stay in the love with
mm,
myself and with her.
mm, mhm.
So back to what you were saying, I
Yeah.
think it does take it out of non-binary. So do you want to say more
Well,
about any of those threads that you just
well,
tugged
I was
on?
also just thinking about, I was looking at the plant behind you, and
Mm-hmm.
I had the thought today that I am part plant, you
I,
know. And
you are with your sunshine
you
needs.
might, people might not normally be able to perceive that about me. They don't see my leaves. They don't, see that I'm engaged in the process of photosynthesis or whatever it is that I'm doing. But there is no question that I need a lot of natural light and I need a lot of
Yeah,
sun.
yeah.
And that seems to be a basic need. Having a lot of natural light and sun contribute so much to my well-being. And I have known very, very few people for whom that is as true. And I've known lots of people that have really different conditions that contribute to their well-being.
Mm-hmm.
And, like some people that really, really like to be in lots of rain and fog and gray days, and they don't care that much if they have a lot of windows in their house, or they really like to be in the redwood forest. I think redwoods are magnificent beings, but I don't like to be in redwood forests for very long because they're so dark.
Right.
So,
Yeah.
and on the level of plants, we could acknowledge this. Like that fern behind you has very specific needs.
Yeah.
And different kinds of plants have different kinds of needs, right? So if I'm going
Mm-hmm.
to own my plantness, I can own the kind of plant that I am, even though my leaves are not as visibly apparent. I know I had a point there.
Well, can I tag on to that?
Absolutely.
Because it feels like maybe your leaves aren't seen, but your field is felt. Going back to the field and the state. I mean, I know you as a teacher. I mean, obviously I know you as a dear sister, but the level of compassion that your presence brings forward, those are your leaves. Like
Hmm.
that's what, maybe they're not visible, but that's what comes off in your field because of the way that you have deepened that with yourself.
Hmm. That's
So
a beautiful way of looking at it. Yeah, just yesterday in a class, I was talking with a participant and I was just kind of encouraging her to get to know her Nancy self. Like, what are
mm,
the conditions under which Nancy thrives?
hmm
And she was saying, yeah, she's never really let herself ask that question. And then she was reflecting back to me that she sees me being much more energized and looking more radiant and looking much better than I was for a period of time. And I
hmm
said, that's because I am really trying to live this life, asking those questions. What are the conditions under which this Ruth self, with all the whole combination of spiritual wounds, physical wounds in terms of health challenges, emotional wounds, etc., different parts of myself, like this whole compiled collage being that I am, what are the conditions under which this being thrives at this time? And a lot
hmm
of that is energetic because I
hmm
feel so different in different places,
Yeah, absolutely.
so
And
dramatically different.
yeah, I think that's why, and I'm just noticing the time, so we can start to transition in a moment. But I think that's why I'm so passionate about this program I'm putting together around the nervous system, befriending your nervous system, because
Yeah.
I think the more that we strengthen and tonify our capacity to be both activated and find centering and groundedness at the same time, the more I think it's easier to discover who we really are, to actually know our Nanciness, or to know it, and to be honest about the subtleties, like me with this friend who I adore, and realizing it's about my nervous system. I don't have
Mm,
to make up any story about her. It's about the level of fragmentation that I start to feel in the field, where I don't feel like my thoughts are very coherent. And then I leave and I'm like coherent again. And that's
mhm.
not to blame anything. It's just the field.
Right.
So I think that that would be such a huge piece in my book of just why working with our nervous system at a very physiological level, whether it's breath work or silence or meditation, is so helpful in terms of this coherence that we're talking about and the field that we're creating.
Yeah,
So,
that's beautiful. And then just seeing, where does our nervous system feel that sense of ease and opening, around which
yeah,
people, in which places, in which circumstances,
yeah,
that's all part of befriending our nervous systems.
yeah. Well, I guess I won't leave you messages anymore referring to you as a cat. I'm going to start referring to you as a
Well,
plant with all of your sun needs. I always call you a cat, but I won't anymore.
I don't know,
Um,
maybe I'm part cat too. Who
I think you
knows?
are. I think you
Yeah.
are. We've covered a lot of different ground. Do you feel that there's anything else that you want to make a comment on before we talk a little bit about what you do with CGA, Conscious Girlfriend Academy?
I think I just want to say that this is just a process of discernment for each of us at each point
Yes.
in our lives. Like, what feels like the medicine now?
Mm-hmm.
So that, because we do so much have a tendency to say, is this a sign of healing, or is this a sign of my
Yeah.
wounding? Is this getting me forward, or is this moving me backward? Like, what's
Yeah.
healthier? And all of those binary terms, A, they're so binary, and B, they suggest that there is a healthier, and
Mm-hmm.
so, or a better, or a more evolved. And so what if we could throw that out and just say,
Mm-hmm.
it's just about this is what I like about where you went with coherence. What feels like it brings me more coherence, or more peace, or more ease, or more well-being? What just feels like it deeply serves me more at this moment in time? Because
Mm-hmm.
that could be romantic relationship of myriad kinds. We haven't even talked about monogamous, poly, living
Right.
together, not living together, frame of relationship, like so many different kinds. Some of it might be not romantic relationship. It might be a deep soul friendship. Is that
Mm-hmm.
still solitude? I remember one day you said, like, does it count as solitude if I'm with Angel?
That's right. That was me in a binary place, speaking of.
Right, right.
Yeah, totally.
Exactly. So for anybody listening, I just really want to say explicitly, we are not talking about better, worse, more
Mm-mm.
spiritual, more evolved, healthier. We're just talking about, like, this vast realm of experience that we're
Mm-hmm.
each engaging with from different places in different moments in our lives with different needs
Yeah,
and different
so well said.
possibilities.
Yeah, because I appreciate you bringing that in as the closing, because without that, it's so easy to reinforce narratives of, am I doing this right or wrong? Am I broken, or am I getting fixed? Am I healing, or am I
And those
backtracking?
narratives absolutely do not enhance coherence.
No,
Those
they
narratives
no.
do the opposite,
Whoop. Yeah.
whether we're trying to be more healed or better, or,
Yeah,
judging ourselves. Or, yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah,
Well, let's just talk a little bit about
yeah,
Conscious Girlfriend Academy. And because
yeah,
I know it's about women finding love, but I also know it's a lot bigger. That's more than just about love. So,
absolutely. Conscious Girlfriend Academy is a conscious, compassionate space for lesbians, queer women, women loving women, adjacent non binary people on this plane of existence at this time. And I think in a way it's arbitrary, and then in a way it's not. Like, there are certain experiences that lesbians or women who love women tend to share, certain ways that we tend to be able to get each other, sometimes that many of us don't feel gotten in the larger world because it's so heteronormative. And so it's
mm-hmm,
a space for us to come together and get to know ourselves more and more deeply. Many people come with the specific intention of finding a romantic partnership. Some people come with the intention of healing from a past romantic relationship. Some people aren't sure. Some people are in a current romantic relationship and want to have tools for that. But I think also there's this phenomenon of whatever somebody's doorway in may be. A lot of, we all know this from our lives. We head toward a particular door and go through a particular door thinking we're going to find a particular thing on the other side of it. And sometimes what we find is completely not what we expected, but has its own deep rightness and medicine for us. So sometimes that happens in the academy. So, on the most basic level, the academy is a school where people can come and learn about how to prevent heartbreak, date wisely, and love well. And then within that, there's a whole lot about, who am I? How congruent or coherent am I with myself? What triggers come up for me when I'm in relationship with another close person? How can I best work with those for myself, for, to heal, to help that person heal, to create more healing or well-being between us.
Beautiful. Yeah. I just get the sense that it's a place where, and I've seen people's reviews of the academy, that it's just a place where people feel safe in a way that maybe they've never felt before. And as a result, they're getting to know who they really are because they can start talking and hearing themselves speak about what is actually most true for them.
Yeah.
And then to feel celebrated in that by other women.
Yeah.
What a gift. Yeah, what's happening for you?
Women and non-binary people. And I just felt so moved when you said that about safety, because you're right. People give that reflection a lot. And I think that it is a field that we co-create in the academy. And it is such a blessing to me that there is some way that I am able to access or hold a frequency that facilitates that. And then most of the time, other people show up and the frequency gets exponentially stronger. And so much of the safety and healing that people experience in the academy comes from their relationships with each other. But in a different circumstance, that wouldn't be happening. So, the same people could be co-creating something that didn't feel safe at all. You and I know that from the workshops and the trainings and the environments that we've been in. So I don't know. I just felt deeply moved that somehow something happens in that space.
Yeah.
That allows for this unfolding.
I'm going to nerd out for a minute because you naming that, it just feels when there's safety in one person and then there's a sense that the safety ripples into another, the whole field can become coherent, and safety is the key. The nervous system being able to relax and open. And so it feels like that's part of you as a teacher. And then people joining you in that field, bringing the field themselves, and that there's an amplification. And that's a rarity because we both know in many other communities, there can be a lot of energy that creates discoherence. Is that even a word?
Incoherence.
Incoherence. That's the word. Thank you. Yeah, that creates incoherence, and then there's no safety, and then everybody's tightening up, going into their strategies of protection, and then it just gets tighter and tighter.
Right.
So to everyone that's in the academy and to you, just so grateful that you're all creating this space, because this is, I think, I'm going to use the word healing because this is so appropriate, where the healing of being able to be our true selves, that's a huge amplification into the world. So
and then
thank you for
psychology or neuroscience. One thing I say all the time is that by experiencing that anywhere and by being able to allow it in anywhere, we are literally creating new neural pathways that more available to us in romantic relationships if we want that, or in friendships if we want that, or even in our family relationships. If, it in some way doesn't even matter as much where we are as we're repatterning those neural pathways. So then maybe if I'm spending time in a beautiful canyon that I love, surrounded by mountains and a creek, I'm creating neural pathways there that then I'll take forth into my human relationships,
Absolutely. Yes. I'm so happy we did this. Thank you
This was
for
beautiful.
coming
Thank
on.
you so much.
Yeah.
Very, it is beautiful. I love getting to be in this
Love
space.
you, Ruth.
I love
You
you.
too. Okay. Well, to be continued. I have a feeling we'll do more.
Oh, yeah, always.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.